Marcus Chen pressed his face against the cold transport window as the massive space station came into view. The Galactic Combat Academy floated like a giant metal flower in the void, its 12 arms stretching out from a central hub. Each arm housed different species training facilities, and Marcus was heading to Arm 7, where interspecies combat classes took place. The 17-year-old human had dreamed of this moment for 3 years. When Earth joined the Galactic Union, the Academy had opened its doors to human students for the first time. Only 50 humans had been selected from billions of applicants. Marcus had trained every day since he was 14, learning basic galactic standard language and studying alien combat forms through primitive hologram recordings. "Docking in 5 minutes," announced the pilot. "A blue-skinned Zephyrian with 4 arms. Remember, kid, humans have only been here for 2 semesters. Don't expect too much." Marcus nodded, checking his small bag one more time. Inside were his Earth martial arts certificates, photos of his family, and a small wooden pendant his grandmother had given him. The pendant bore the Chinese character for perseverance, something his grandmother said would serve him better than any weapon. The docking bay hummed with activity as various species moved about their business. Marcus saw his first live aliens up close. Tall, graceful ethereals with translucent skin, stocky granite folk whose skin looked like living stone, and sleek aquarians with gill slits along their necks. They all moved with purpose and confidence, making Marcus feel very small and very human. "Marcus Chen?" a voice called out in heavily accented galactic standard. Marcus turned to see a creature unlike anything from his study materials. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, with emerald green scales covering its muscular frame. 6 arms extended from its torso, each ending in hands with 3 thick fingers. Its reptilian head had large golden eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. "I am Instructor Vashtai of the Saurian Imperial Guard," the creature said. "I will be your combat instructor. Follow me." As they walked through corridors lined with trophy cases and honor boards, Vashtai explained the Academy's structure. "You will train with students from 12 different species. Combat class runs 6 days a week, 3 hours per day. We use the universal ranking system, white belt through black belt, with 5 degrees of black belt beyond that." Marcus noticed that all the names on the honor boards belonged to species he'd studied. No human names appeared anywhere. "How long does it usually take to earn a black belt?" Marcus asked. Vashtai's laugh sounded like rocks grinding together. "For most species, 2 to 3 years of intensive training. The record holder is Zexkar of the Granite Folk, who achieved his black belt in 14 months. The instructor's golden eyes fixed on Marcus. "Humans. Well, we shall see." They entered a vast training hall with a domed ceiling that displayed a star field. The floor was covered in specialized mats that could adapt to different gravity and atmospheric conditions. About 30 students were practicing various combat forms, their movements flowing like deadly dances. "Students, attention!" Vashtai called out. The hall fell silent as all eyes turned toward Marcus. He felt his cheeks burn as he took in the stares. Some faces showed curiosity, others showed barely concealed amusement. "This is Marcus Chen, our new human student. He will be joining your training group." A ripple of whispers spread through the students. Marcus caught fragments in different languages, but the tone was clear enough. "Humans are the soft species, right? I heard they can't even see properly in full-spectrum light. Look how weak his bone structure is." A particularly tall ethereal, with silver markings on her translucent skin, stepped forward. Her name was Lyralai, and she was known throughout the Academy as one of the most skilled fighters in her year. "Instructor Vashatai," she said, her voice like wind chimes. "Perhaps the human should start with the younglings. This is an advanced class." Several students chuckled. Marcus felt his face grow hotter, but he kept his expression neutral. His grandmother's training in meditation was paying off. Chen will train with his age group, Vashatai said firmly. Age groups are determined by biological development, not species bias. Lyrelai shrugged gracefully. Of course, instructor. I meant no offense. I simply thought it would be safer for him. Marcus caught the underlying meaning. She thought he was too weak to train with them. For today, Vashti announced, we will practice the fourth form of Zephyrian wind combat. Students, pair off. The students quickly formed pairs, leaving Marcus standing alone. It was clear no one wanted to partner with the human. Crickstar, Vashti called to a young Granite Folk student. You will work with Chen. Crickstar was shorter than Marcus, but probably weighed twice as much. His stone-like skin was dark gray with veins of silver running through it. He approached Marcus with obvious reluctance. Try not to break soft skin, he muttered in accented galactic standard. The fourth form of Zephyrian wind combat involved a series of rapid strikes and blocks, designed to mimic the way Zephyrians used their 4 arms in battle. For species with only 2 arms, it required incredible speed and precision. Marcus watched as the other students began the form. Their movements were fluid and powerful, each strike flowing seamlessly into the next. Lyrelai was particularly impressive, her ethereal body seeming to bend light as she moved. Your turn, Crickstar said, moving into the starting position. Marcus copied the stance he'd observed, trying to remember the sequence. The first strike came slowly. Crickstar was clearly holding back. Marcus blocked it easily, but the impact sent vibrations up his arm. The Granite Folk student was incredibly strong. Faster, Vashti called out. This is combat training, not a dance recital. Crickstar's next strike came with more force. Marcus barely got his block up in time, and the impact knocked him back a step. Around the hall, other students had stopped their own practice to watch the human struggle. Is he made of paper? Someone laughed. I've seen training dummies with better form. Marcus tried to ignore the comments and focus on the pattern. Block, strike, pivot, block, strike. But Crickstar's strength was overwhelming. Each blocked attack sent shock waves through Marcus's arms and shoulders. After 10 minutes, Marcus's muscles were screaming and sweat dripped from his face. Crickstar, meanwhile, looked like he'd been taking a leisurely walk. Enough, Vashti called. Chen, your endurance is concerning, and your technique needs significant work. More snickers echoed around the hall. Marcus felt his face burning again, but this time with anger rather than embarrassment. He'd trained for 3 years to get here, earned black belts in multiple earth martial arts, and pushed his body to its limits every single day. But apparently, none of that mattered here. Tomorrow we will work on basic conditioning, the instructor continued. Class dismissed. As students began filing out, chatting among themselves in their various languages, Lyrelai approached Marcus. Up close, he could see that her silver markings actually moved slowly across her skin, like liquid metal. Human, she said, not unkindly. Perhaps you should consider transferring to academic studies. The Academy has excellent xenobiology and cultural programs. Marcus looked up at her. She was nearly 7 feet tall, and spoke quietly but clearly. I'm here to learn combat. I didn't come this far to quit on my first day. She tilted her head, studying him with eyes that shifted through different shades of blue. Admirable spirit, but spirit alone will not protect you when facing a real opponent. In my homeworld's atmosphere, you would suffocate in minutes. In Crickstar's home gravity, your bones would snap under your own weight. You are fragile. Maybe, Marcus said, shouldering his bag. But I'm also here. That earned him a small smile from the ethereal. Yes, you are. We shall see how long that lasts. As Marcus walked through the corridors toward his dormitory, he passed more trophy cases and achievement boards. Images of fierce alien warriors in combat poses lined the walls, along with quotes about honor, strength, and victory. Everything was designed to inspire greatness, but Marcus felt smaller with each step. His room was tiny but functional, with a bed, desk, and small viewport showing the stars. Marcus unpacked his few belongings and sat on the bed holding his grandmother's pendant. "Perseverance," he whispered in English, then in Mandarin, "Yi Li." He thought about calling home, but Earth was 8 hours behind station time, and his family would be sleeping. Instead, he pulled up the Academy's computer system and began studying. The database contained thousands of combat forms from across the galaxy. Each species had developed their fighting styles based on their unique biology and environmental challenges. Zephyrians fought with 4 arms because that's how they evolved. Granite folk used their incredible strength and density. Ethereals could manipulate light and phase partially out of the physical realm. But humans? What did humans have? Marcus scrolled through the limited data on human combat abilities. Most of it was theoretical, based on biological scans and reports from Earth's martial arts practitioners. The data seemed almost apologetic in its assessment. Moderate strength, average speed, limited sensory range, fragile bone structure. There had to be more to it. Humans hadn't survived on Earth for millions of years by being weak. They hadn't built cities, explored space, and earned their place in the Galactic Union by being fragile. Marcus pulled up videos of human martial artists from Earth's archives. He watched masters of karate, kung fu, boxing, jiu-jitsu, and dozens of other fighting styles. Each art had been developed to overcome specific challenges: larger opponents, multiple attackers, weapons, different environments. Adaptation. That was it. Humans didn't evolve to be the strongest or fastest. They evolved to be adaptable. They could learn, modify, and combine techniques from anywhere. On Earth, human martial arts had influenced each other for thousands of years. Japanese karate borrowed from Chinese kung fu. Brazilian jiu-jitsu combined Japanese techniques with local innovation. What if he could do the same here? Marcus spent hours studying alien combat forms, breaking them down into component movements. Zephyrian wind techniques relied on multiple striking surfaces, but the principles of momentum and timing were universal. Granite folk power strikes used their natural density, but the biomechanics of force generation were similar across species. By the time Station Night Cycle began, Marcus had filled several pages with notes and sketches. He was exhausted, but for the first time since arriving, he felt hopeful. The next morning brought more of the same treatment. During warm-up exercises, Marcus struggled to keep up with movements that came naturally to his alien classmates. His flexibility was limited compared to the snake-like serpentines. His strength was negligible next to the granite folk. His balance was poor compared to the naturally graceful ethereals. "Chen," Vashatai called during conditioning drills, "your progress is minimal." The instructor's tone was neutral, but the message was clear. Marcus was falling behind, and everyone knew it. During sparring practice, he was paired with different students each day. The results were always the same. Crixtar overpowered him easily. Lyrale moved so fast her attacks seemed to come from thin air. A young serpentine named Cecileth could dislocate her own joints to avoid his blocks and strike from impossible angles. After a week, the snickering had turned to outright mockery. "The humans should try flower arranging," suggested a Zephyrian student named Quarks, flexing all 4 of his blue-skinned arms. "At least flowers don't fight back." "I heard humans eat their own young when food is scarce," added another voice. "Maybe combat training awakens those instincts." Marcus had learned to tune out most of the comments, but they still stung. Worse, he was beginning to doubt himself. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans just weren't built for galactic-level combat. It was during his second week that everything changed. Marcus was in the Academy's library studying late into the night cycle. The vast digital archives contained combat knowledge from hundreds of species across thousands of years. He'd been working his way through historical combat records, looking for patterns and principles that transcended species barriers. That's when he found it. Hidden deep in the archives was a restricted file about an ancient species called the predecessors. They had vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago, leaving behind only ruins and fragments of technology. But according to the file, they had developed something called universal combat theory, a mathematical approach to fighting that could be adapted by any species. The file was heavily encrypted and marked with warnings about unauthorized access. But Marcus's grandmother had taught him more than just perseverance. She'd also taught him patience and creativity. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus carefully worked his way through the encryption using techniques his computer science classes on Earth had never covered. When he finally accessed the files, what he found changed everything. Universal combat theory wasn't about being stronger or faster. It was about understanding the fundamental principles that governed all combat across all species: force, leverage, timing, distance, momentum. These were mathematical constants that worked the same way for everyone. The predecessors had broken down every possible combat scenario into equations, not complex ones, but elegant formulas that could be applied in real time. They had created a fighting system that could adapt to any opponent, any environment, any circumstance. Marcus spent the rest of the night studying the theory, taking notes, and running calculations. By morning, he understood something that no one else in the academy knew. Combat wasn't about what your species could do naturally. It was about what you could learn to do efficiently. And humans, more than any other species in the galaxy, were built to learn. Marcus spent the next 3 days studying the universal combat theory in secret. The predecessor files were fascinating but complex. They described combat as a series of mathematical relationships between opponents. Every movement could be calculated, every response predicted, every advantage quantified. What amazed Marcus most was how the theory explained why different species fought the way they did. Zephyrians used forearm combinations because their brain structure processed multiple simultaneous actions efficiently. Granite folk relied on power strikes because their dense bodies stored kinetic energy like springs. Ethereals phased in and out of solid form because their molecular structure existed partially in subspace. But humans had something unique. According to the predecessor files, humans had the highest neuroplasticity of any known species. Their brains could rewire themselves constantly, adapting to new situations faster than any other sentient life form. The files called it dynamic combat adaptation, the ability to learn from every single exchange and immediately modify technique to counter specific opponents. Marcus began putting the theory into practice during his regular training sessions. At first, nothing seemed different. He still got thrown around by Crixtar and couldn't touch Lyrelai in sparring. But now he was fighting with purpose, collecting data with every exchange. When Crixtar threw a power strike, Marcus measured the timing, force angle, and recovery period. When Lyrelai phased through his attacks, he calculated the energy cost and duration limits of her ability. When Sisileth dislocated her joints for impossible strikes, he tracked the movement patterns and vulnerable moments. His classmates noticed his improved focus but mistook it for desperation. "The human is trying so hard now," laughed Quarks during a break between exercises. "It's almost sad." "Perhaps he's finally accepting that he doesn't belong here," suggested another student, a crystalline being whose name sounded like breaking glass. Even Instructor Vashatai seemed concerned. After Marcus lost his 15th consecutive sparring match, the Saurian pulled him aside. "Chen," Vashatai said, his golden eyes studying the young human. "You have been here 3 weeks. Your dedication is admirable, but your progress is negligible. Perhaps it is time to consider other options." Marcus wiped sweat from his face with a towel. His body was covered in bruises from training, and his muscles ached constantly. but his mind was clearer than it had ever been. "What's the Academy record for advancement from white belt to black belt?" he asked. Vashitai's scaled brow ridges rose in surprise. "As I mentioned before, the record holder is Zexkar of the Granite Folk. 14 months of intensive training." "What about the speed records for individual belt tests?" "Individual tests?" The instructor thought for a moment. "The fastest single advancement was achieved by Lyralai. She completed her green belt test in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Why do you ask?" Marcus managed a small smile despite his exhaustion. "Just curious about the standards I'm working toward." That night, Marcus made a decision. He had been studying universal combat theory for a week, but he'd only been applying it passively. It was time to take the next step. The Academy's training facilities were available to students at all hours. Marcus made his way to Training Hall 7, the smallest and least popular facility. It was equipped with basic holographic projectors and force feedback systems. Marcus spent the next 6 hours programming combat simulations based on the universal combat theory equations. He created virtual opponents with the exact fighting characteristics of his classmates, down to their timing patterns and favorite combinations. Then he began to fight them. The first simulated battle against virtual Krikstar lasted 8 seconds before Marcus was thrown across the room, but those 8 seconds provided valuable data. Marcus adjusted the equations, modified his approach, and tried again. 7 seconds, 6 seconds, 5. By his 50th attempt, Marcus was lasting nearly 30 seconds against the simulated Granite Folk. More importantly, he was beginning to see the patterns. Krikstar's devastating power strikes created specific vulnerabilities. The wind-up time for his strongest attacks left openings that lasted exactly 0.3 seconds. His recovery periods were proportionally longer after maximum force strikes. Marcus moved on to virtual Lyralai. Her speed and phasing abilities made her nearly untouchable, but the universal combat theory revealed weaknesses even in her elegant style. Her phasing required conscious effort and energy expenditure. She couldn't phase and attack simultaneously. Most importantly, she tended to materialize in predictable positions relative to her starting point. The breakthrough came during his battle against virtual SS Leth. The Serpentine's joint dislocation ability seemed impossible to counter, but Marcus discovered something remarkable in the data. While her flexibility was superhuman by most standards, it followed precise mathematical principles: joint angles, muscle tension, momentum conservation. It was all quantifiable. More than that, Marcus realized he didn't need to match their abilities. He needed to exploit the mathematical relationships between their strengths and weaknesses. When Krikstar committed to a power strike, the momentum physics meant he couldn't change direction for a specific time period. When Lyralai phased, energy conservation meant she couldn't do it indefinitely. When Sisleth dislocated her joints, biomechanics meant certain positions left her unable to generate power. Marcus began developing counters based on these principles, not techniques that required him to be stronger or faster, but approaches that used his opponent's own abilities against them. The math was beautiful in its simplicity. Over the next week, Marcus spent his days in regular classes and his nights in Training Hall 7. His performance during normal training sessions remained poor, but he was gathering more and more data with each exchange. His classmates grew bolder in their mockery. "I heard the human has been practicing alone," Krikstar announced loudly during a sparring session. "Perhaps he's afraid of getting hurt in real combat." "Alone is probably safer for everyone," added Sisleth, her forked tongue flicking out in what Marcus had learned was serpentine laughter. "No one wants to accidentally break the fragile human." Even Lyralai seemed to have lost interest in him. Where she had once offered polite advice, she now barely acknowledged his presence. But Marcus was patient. His grandmother had taught him that the best victories often looked like defeats right up until the moment they weren't. The opportunity came during his 4th week at the academy. Instructor Vashatai announced that the class would be participating in demonstration matches for visiting dignitaries from the Galactic Council. Each student would have the chance to showcase their skills in formal combat tests. "This is an opportunity to represent your species with honor," Vashatai explained. "The council members will be evaluating our training methods and considering academy funding for the next cycle." Marcus saw several students glance in his direction with worried expressions. Having the weakest student demonstrate would not reflect well on the program. "Instructor," Lyrelei spoke up, her melodic voice carefully neutral. "Perhaps some students should focus on basic techniques for the demonstration. We wouldn't want to oversimplify the advanced forms." The message was clear. She was suggesting that Marcus be excluded from the real demonstrations. Vashatai considered this. The council specifically requested to see students from all represented species. Chen will participate. Marcus caught the slight emphasis on participate. The instructor was clearly planning to have him demonstrate basic techniques, while the more skilled students showed advanced combat forms. That night, Marcus made his final preparations. He had now run over 3,000 combat simulations using universal combat theory. The equations had revealed something that surprised even him. Humans weren't just adaptable. They were uniquely capable of simultaneous multivariable optimization. While other species tended to excel in specific areas, human brains could process and balance dozens of combat variables in real time. Speed, strength, technique, timing, position, momentum, energy expenditure, psychological factors. Humans could unconsciously calculate optimal responses across all these dimensions simultaneously. The predecessors had noted this ability but hadn't fully understood its implications. They had created universal combat theory as an intellectual exercise. They never imagined a species that could implement it instinctively. Marcus spent his last night of preparation running full combat scenarios against virtual versions of every fighting style in the Academy database. He wasn't trying to master any single technique. Instead, he was teaching his brain to recognize and respond to the mathematical relationships that governed all combat. By morning, something had changed in his neural pathways. The calculations that had required conscious effort now ran automatically in the background of his mind. When he looked at a combat situation, he didn't see techniques. He saw mathematical relationships. The demonstration day arrived with great ceremony. The training hall had been reconfigured with raised platforms for formal combat testing. Gallery seating surrounded the central arena, filled with council members from dozens of species. Marcus recognized some of the dignitaries from his studies. Admiral Tiketh of the Saurian Imperial Navy, High Philosopher Zendar of the Ethereal Confederacy, and Chancellor Groxnar, representing the Granite Folk Republic. "Students will demonstrate their abilities through formal advancement testing," Vashtai announced to the assembled crowd. "Today, several students will attempt to advance to higher belt ranks." The demonstrations began with spectacular displays of skill. A Zephyrian student advanced from blue belt to purple belt with a flawless exhibition of aerial combat techniques. Sisileth earned her red belt through a mesmerizing display of flexibility-based combat that left the council members applauding. When Lyrelei stepped onto the platform for her brown belt test, the hall fell silent. Her demonstration was breathtaking. She moved like liquid light, phasing in and out of solid form while executing complex attack sequences. The test required her to defeat 3 holographic opponents simultaneously while blindfolded, relying only on her enhanced senses. She completed it in 4 minutes and 12 seconds, breaking her own Academy record. "Magnificent," breathed High Philosopher Zendar. "The ethereal combat forms continue to evolve beautifully." Finally, it was Marcus's turn. The hall quieted again, but this time the silence felt different. Expectant. Nervous. "Chen will demonstrate basic white belt techniques," Vashatai announced, his tone carefully neutral. Marcus walked to the center of the platform, very aware of all the eyes upon him. In the gallery, he could see council members leaning forward with curiosity. Most had never seen a human in person before. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I'd like to test for black belt." The silence that followed was complete. Vashti's golden eyes widened. "Chen, that is irregular. Students must advance through each belt level sequentially. You are currently at white belt." "According to Academy regulations," Marcus replied, having memorized the rules, "any student may attempt to test for any rank if they believe they have mastered the required skills. There's no requirement for sequential advancement." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Several council members were consulting their translation devices, unsure they had heard correctly. Admiral Taketh leaned forward in his seat. "Did the human just request to skip directly from white belt to black belt?" "Impossible," muttered Chancellor Groxnar. "No student has ever advanced more than one belt level in a single test." Vashti looked thoroughly uncomfortable. "Chen, a black belt test requires you to demonstrate mastery of combat techniques from all major galactic fighting traditions. You would need to defeat 5 opponents simultaneously using different combat styles. The test has never been completed in less than 45 minutes. Marcus nodded. "I understand the requirements." "Furthermore," the instructor continued, "failure to complete a black belt test results in immediate expulsion from the academy." "I understand that too." The hall was so quiet, Marcus could hear the environmental systems humming. In the student section, his classmates looked shocked. Krikstar was shaking his head in disbelief. Lirelai appeared concerned, as if worried that the human might actually be having some kind of mental breakdown. High Philosopher Zendar spoke up. "Instructor Vashti, in the interest of scientific inquiry, I believe we should allow this test to proceed. It will provide valuable data about human psychology and self-assessment capabilities." The other council members murmured agreement. They were clearly curious to see how badly the human would fail. Vashti's expression suggested he thought this was a terrible idea. But he couldn't refuse a direct request from the council. "Very well," he said reluctantly. "Chen, prepare for black belt examination." The holographic systems activated, creating 5 virtual opponents around Marcus. Each represented a different major fighting tradition: Zephyrian wind combat, granite folk power striking, ethereal phase fighting, serpentine flexibility forms, and Aquarian flow techniques. Marcus took his position in the center of the arena. Around him, the 5 holograms assumed their ready stances. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him. In his mind, the universal combat theory equations began running automatically. Distance calculations, momentum vectors, energy expenditure rates, timing intervals. His brain processed it all simultaneously. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Marcus felt truly calm. "Begin," Vashti called. Marcus moved. Time seemed to slow as Marcus assessed the 5 opponents surrounding him. His human brain, enhanced by weeks of universal combat theory training, calculated hundreds of variables in the first microsecond. The Zephyrian hologram moved first, all 4 arms spinning in a windmill attack pattern. Standard opening for wind combat practitioners, designed to establish distance and test reaction time. Marcus didn't move to block or dodge. Instead, he stepped directly into the attack, his timing calculated to the nanosecond. He caught the Zephyrian's rhythm between arm rotations, the brief moment when all 4 limbs were transitioning and unable to generate force. His palm strike hit the hologram's center mass with perfect precision. The impact disrupted the wind combat form's momentum, sending the virtual Zephyrian stumbling backward. 3 seconds elapsed. The granite folk opponent launched into its signature power strike, a devastating overhead smash that could crack stone. Marcus had faced this exact attack hundreds of times in simulation. He knew it took exactly 1.7 seconds to execute and created a forward momentum that couldn't be redirected. Marcus didn't try to block the massive fist. Instead, he moved parallel to the strike path, letting physics do the work. The granite folk's own momentum carried it past its target. At the precise moment of maximum extension, Marcus delivered a calculated strike to the hologram's elbow joint. The virtual opponent's arm collapsed, and its massive body toppled forward from uncontrolled momentum. 6 seconds. The ethereal hologram began phasing, its form becoming translucent as it prepared to attack from an intangible state. This was Lyralay's favorite technique, nearly impossible to counter because solid attacks passed harmlessly through phased opponents. But Marcus had studied the energy equations governing phase states. The ethereal couldn't remain intangible indefinitely, and it had to become solid to actually strike. More importantly, phasing required tremendous concentration, which meant the hologram's tactical awareness was reduced while transitioning between states. Marcus waited, his enhanced perception tracking the subtle energy signatures that preceded rematerialization. When the ethereal began to solidify for its attack, Marcus was already moving. He struck not at where the hologram was, but where it would be when it became solid again. The impact caught the virtual ethereal mid-transition, disrupting its phase state and sending it crashing to the platform. 9 seconds. The serpentine opponent was already in motion, its flexible body contorting as it dislocated multiple joints to strike from an impossible angle. SS Leth used this exact technique. It was nearly unblockable because the attack could come from any direction. Nearly unblockable, but not undefeatable. Marcus had calculated something that other species missed about serpentine flexibility. While they could dislocate their joints, the laws of physics still applied to their bodies. Muscle contractions, nerve responses, and blood flow all followed predictable patterns, even in their most flexible configurations. The serpentine hologram twisted its spine 90 degrees and struck with its tail while simultaneously attacking with both hands from completely different angles. It should have been impossible to defend against. Marcus responded with a technique that no academy instructor had ever seen. He moved not to block any of the attacks, but to intercept the mathematical point where all three strike vectors converged, the serpentine's center of balance. His strike hit the hologram at precisely the moment when its distributed attack left its core undefended. The virtual serpentine collapsed, its flexible body unable to maintain structure once its balance point was compromised. 11 seconds. The final opponent, the Aquarian hologram, represented the most sophisticated fighting style in the Academy. Aquarian flow techniques were based on constant motion, like fighting underwater. Practitioners never stopped moving, never committed to any single attack, and adapted fluidly to any situation. It should have been the perfect counter to Marcus's mathematical approach. How could you calculate responses to an opponent that never followed predictable patterns? But as the Aquarian hologram began its flowing assault, Marcus realized something profound. Universal combat theory hadn't just taught him to counter specific techniques, it had taught him to think like the universe itself. Physics didn't care about fighting styles. Momentum was momentum. Energy was energy. Force was force. The Aquarian's flowing movements were beautiful, but they still obeyed the laws of motion. Every curve had a mathematical function. Every transition had an energy cost. Every adaptation had predictable limits. Marcus stopped thinking about fighting and started thinking about mathematics in motion, as the Aquarian hologram flowed around him in a perfect spiral of attacks. Marcus saw the underlying equation that governed its movement. He could predict not just its next position, but the position after that, and after that. The hologram struck from 7 different angles in rapid succession, each attack flowing seamlessly into the next. Marcus didn't block any of them. Instead, he stepped into the mathematical center of the spiral, the one point in space where the Aquarian's own momentum would carry it regardless of its intentions. His final strike was gentle, almost casual. He simply placed his hand against the hologram's chest as it flowed directly into the contact. The virtual Aquarian's own momentum did the rest, and it crumpled to the platform. 13 seconds. Total silence filled the training hall. Marcus stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by 5 deactivated holograms. He wasn't even breathing hard. Around him, hundreds of faces stared in absolute shock. In the gallery, Admiral Teketh's mouth hung open. Chancellor Groxanar had actually dropped his datapad. High Philosopher Zendar was frantically checking her translation device, certain she had misunderstood what she'd witnessed. In the student section, Crickstar looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Sesleth's forked tongue hung completely still. Quarks's 4 arms had gone limp with surprise. Lyrale was staring at Marcus with an expression of complete bewilderment, her silver markings swirling rapidly across her skin in patterns that indicated extreme confusion. Instructor Vashatai stood frozen at the edge of the platform, his golden eyes wide and his scaled jaw slack. It was High Philosopher Zendar who finally broke the silence. 13 seconds, she whispered, her melodic voice barely audible. Then louder, 13 seconds. A ripple of excited conversation erupted through the gallery as the council members began talking over each other in multiple languages. Impossible. The timing systems must be malfunctioning. Run the test again. Admiral Teketh stood up, his massive saurian frame towering over the other council members. Silence, he roared, and the hall instantly quieted. He turned his piercing gaze toward Marcus. Human, explain what we just witnessed. Marcus looked up at the gallery, still feeling the mathematical equations running through his mind like background music. How could he explain universal combat theory to species who had never needed to think beyond their natural abilities? Every species in the galaxy is stronger than humans, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. Or faster, or more flexible, or has better senses. You all have natural advantages that we don't possess. He gestured toward his fallen classmates. Crickstar can hit 10 times harder than I can. Lyrale can move at speeds I can't even track. Sesleth can bend her body in ways that would break my bones. The council members listened intently, their translation devices working overtime to convert his words into their various languages. But humans have something different, Marcus continued. We adapt. When we face something stronger, we find ways to use its strength against itself. When we face something faster, we learn to be where it's going instead of where it is. When we can't match an ability, we figure out how to make that ability irrelevant. He looked around at the faces watching him. Alien species from across the galaxy, all struggling to understand what they'd just seen. Every fighting style in the galaxy follows the same basic physical laws. Force, momentum, energy, balance, these are mathematical constants. They work the same way for everyone. What I did wasn't about being stronger or faster. It was about understanding the math. High Philosopher Zendar leaned forward. Are you saying you calculated those entire combat sequences in real time? Marcus nodded. Every movement creates predictable consequences. Every technique has exploitable weaknesses built into its physics. Humans don't just adapt to fighting styles. We adapt to the universe itself. Chancellor Groxnar stood up slowly, his stone-like features creased in concentration. This implies that human combat potential is not limited by physical capabilities. That's correct, Marcus said. We're limited only by our understanding. The implications of this statement rippled through the assembled council members like shock waves. Admiral Teketh exchanged urgent glances with the other military representatives. Instructor Vashatai finally found his voice. Chen, how long have you possessed these abilities? Marcus considered the question carefully. I've always had the basic capability, but I only learned how to use it during my time here at the Academy. Your teaching methods forced me to think beyond human limitations. That wasn't entirely true. The predecessor files had been crucial, but Marcus intuited that revealing ancient alien combat secrets might complicate things unnecessarily. The human mastered techniques from 5 different species simultaneously, Admiral Taketh said to his colleagues. In 13 seconds, he demonstrated complete understanding of combat forms that take our best students years to learn. More than understanding, High Philosopher Zendar corrected. He demonstrated the ability to counter all of them simultaneously while using none of them directly. That suggests a level of universal combat comprehension we've never encountered. In the student section, Marcus's classmates were starting to recover from their shock. Whispered conversations began spreading through the group. How did he move like that? Did you see the way he predicted the Aquarian's flow pattern? He made it look effortless. Lyrelay stood up from her seat and walked to the edge of the student section. Her ethereal voice rang out clearly. Marcus, I owe you an apology. I thought you were weak because you couldn't match our natural abilities. I didn't understand that you were learning to transcend them entirely. Crixtar stepped forward next, his stone-like features showing an emotion Marcus had never seen from him before. Respect. Soft skin. Marcus. Would you be willing to teach me how you did that? This question sparked immediate interest throughout the hall. Students from every species began talking excitedly about the possibility of learning human combat adaptation techniques. But it was Instructor Vashitai who asked the most important question. Chen, given what you've demonstrated today, what rank do you believe you should hold at this academy? Marcus looked around the training hall one more time, at the students who had mocked him for weeks, at the council members who had expected to see him fail spectacularly, at the instructor who had gently suggested he consider other academic options. I think, he said quietly, I should be learning alongside everyone else. This isn't about rank or who's strongest. It's about understanding that every species has something valuable to contribute to the universal principles of combat. He gestured toward his former opponents. Crixtar's power techniques taught me about momentum conservation. Lyralay's phasing showed me how energy states can be manipulated. Leth's flexibility demonstrated the relationship between structure and function. Every fighting style I've encountered has added to my understanding. High Philosopher Zendar stood up, her tall frame graceful even in her excitement. Admiral Taketh, Chancellor Groxnar, fellow council members, I believe we are witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. She addressed the entire hall. For millions of years, each species has developed combat techniques based on their unique biological advantages. We've become masters of our individual strengths, but we've remained isolated in our approaches. Her silver markings swirled with growing intensity across her translucent skin. The humans may represent the first species capable of truly universal combat mastery, not because they're the strongest, but because they're the most adaptable. They can learn from every species and synthesize that knowledge into something entirely new. Admiral Taketh nodded slowly. If this ability is representative of human potential in other fields— He didn't finish the statement, but the implications were clear. If humans could adapt and synthesize knowledge at this level in combat, what could they do in science, technology, diplomacy, or exploration? Chancellor Groxnar's deep voice rumbled through the hall. I move to grant the human immediate black belt status and request that human combat specialists be assigned to train with our military academies. Seconded, said Admiral Taketh immediately. Thirded, added High Philosopher Zendar. Instructor Vashitai looked somewhat overwhelmed by the rapid developments. Chen, it appears you have not only earned your black belt, but you may have revolutionized combat training throughout the galaxy." Marcus felt a surge of emotion as he looked around the training hall. 4 weeks ago, he had been the weakest student anyone could remember. Today, he had apparently changed galactic combat theory forever. But what struck him most wasn't the magnitude of his achievement. It was the realization that he hadn't done it alone. "Instructor Vashatai," he said, "I'd like to request that my fellow students be given the opportunity to learn universal combat theory alongside me. What I've learned isn't meant to replace your traditional techniques. It's meant to help everyone understand the deeper principles that make those techniques work." Lyraleigh's eyes brightened with excitement. "You would share this knowledge, even after how we treated you?" Marcus smiled, remembering his grandmother's lessons about perseverance. "Especially because of how you treated me. Adversity taught me to think differently. Maybe now we can all learn to think together." Crixtar stepped forward and extended one massive stone-like hand. "I would be honored to learn from you, Marcus Chen." One by one, the other students approached, offering apologies and requesting to join the new training program. Even Quarks, who had been among the most vocal mockers, humbly asked for the chance to understand human combat adaptation. As the formal ceremony concluded and the council members began planning for expanded human-alien training exchanges, Marcus found himself surrounded by his former classmates, now eager to become his study partners. Instructor Vashatai approached the group, his scaled features showing what Marcus had learned to recognize as saurian approval. "Chen," he said formally, "your black belt test time of 13 seconds has been recorded as a new academy record. More significantly, your demonstration of universal combat theory has been classified as a breakthrough discovery that will reshape martial arts training throughout the Galactic Union." He paused, his golden eyes meeting Marcus's directly. "But perhaps most importantly, you have shown that true strength comes not from what a species can do naturally, but from what they choose to learn from each other." As Marcus looked around at the faces of his new friends and training partners, he understood that this was just the beginning. Humans had earned their place in the galaxy not through superior strength or speed, but through their willingness to adapt, learn, and grow beyond their limitations. The pendant his grandmother had given him felt warm against his chest, and Marcus silently thanked her for teaching him that perseverance wasn't just about enduring hardship, it was about transforming challenge into opportunity. In 13 seconds, a human teenager had earned a black belt and changed the course of galactic combat training forever. But it had taken a lifetime of learning to make those 13 seconds possible.